right, come on back and grab a seat. I don't know how you've been approaching our Bible reading together. I am getting to spend time with a global church again this week, reminded that there's a few simple staples that sustain the diet of every disciple. There is a lot of creativity in how we practice the way of Jesus. There's a lot of creativity and even a variety in the practices which we can be involved in as we follow Jesus as people and as a community, together as a church. There is so much diversity, and it is beautiful, it is glorious. There are books on books on books written. As we have different preachers and teachers teach, you will find that they identify and even encourage us in different practices, which are phenomenal. But what I've found that across every single iteration of the church that I've seen with my own two eyes and have my body in, every iteration that I've read about, every iteration that releases a video that looks pretty amazing, those people, those disciples, those disciple makers are always shaped by prayer first and foremost. And so prayer isn't a precursor to activity. It is the very activity that sustains the people of God. It sustained the life of Jesus. It sustains the ancient people. It sustains this conversation with God, listening and speaking. It's a core element of every diet for every disciple of every generation that has ever been. And I don't even feel bad using all those, that's it. Also is a steady diet of praying and being with God in His Word. Every iteration of every generation of every people group that is following Jesus is in some way, whether written or oral tradition, shaped by the words of God that we contain in what we call the Bible. And so as people pray and they listen to God through His Word and are shaped by that, in community, disciples are released throughout the world. And it takes a bunch of different variety of flavors and different ways that looks and different textures to those communities and different even focus and highlights and things that they matter most in, all diverse, but those elements will always be there, being shaped by God through prayer, being shaped by God through His Word, being shaped by God through His community. And so we together as a church starting back in January said, hey, let's spend time, as many of us as possible, in the Gospel of Matthew over the next year. And I don't know how that's been shaping for you. Some of you have been all in with the reading plans. On Sunday, every single sermon has been out of the book of Matthew on purpose so that we can be shaped by this telling of the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus as we take up our role in God's story in 2024. That's been the hope. And for me, I'm doing that reading with you. That's what shapes my own private reading. This month, we're doing a reading that Chris Preby put together because our family over in Missio Phoenix is doing the same exact thing. He's been tracking a story each week that we can meditate and marinate on. They're focused on the Holy Spirit, with this month being Pentecost as well. And so I would encourage you, one, if you have been doing that, keep with it. Even if you're like, man, but I've already heard these stories. Yes, the point of Bible study is not just more information, but it's to be transformed. And sometimes that takes things dripping slowly over time, not just into our heads, but in our hearts. And so let these stories shape you. And I encourage you, carry on, even if you're like, but I already read that one like twice. What's happening in the rest of the Bible? Very few of us, one, don't know what's happening in the rest of the Bible. And also, that pace of slowing down is really good for our soul, especially in the Western church where we're addicted to more information and something new and something different. And there might be something Jesus wants to tell us using that imagery on drip, where it's slow, it's steady, over time saturating and shaping your hearts. And if you haven't yet joined with us in reading through Matthew, you're like, oh, that's what we're doing? That's why you keep bringing it up? That's okay. You could join in today, and you will be shaped for the next few months as well in the Gospel of Matthew alongside of us. And I would really encourage you to do that. Even if you're reading another plan, throw this in on one day, and you'll be shaped along with the rest of the church. I've watched as I've seen conversations taking place where it's like, hey, I was reading this, and somebody else in the church is able to chime in because they're reading the same thing and being shaped by the same thing across Missio communities, and it's a beautiful thing. And for my own heart, it's been really, really good. My Gospel of Matthew is getting all marked up with what the Spirit's been showing me as I read it and I sit with Him and learn brand new things. Nick's teaching next week a story that I've taught dozens of times in my life. And as we were conversing about it, there was something brand new that I was like, Nick, I've never thought of this before. And then I preached my own sermon to Nick when he was trying to tell me his sermon because I was so excited about what Jesus had to say. And I was like, I have never seen this before. These are things that we get to do. I'm not giving you his sermon, though. So come next week. He's going to preach it. It'll be phenomenal. With the rest of our time, we're going to look at Matthew 8. So if you have a Bible, open it up, Matthew 8. And we're continuing in this little mini-series within the larger Gospel of Matthew just called Follow Me. Stories in following Jesus and what we can learn from them. The entire Gospel of Matthew is not written, we say, just to give an account of the life, the death, and the resurrection of Jesus so you could answer right on a test or to answer right in the communal conversation around your MC. But it's literally written to shape the people of God in the story of God so they could carry out their role in that, in their time and in their place. And so today we're going to look at 3 stories pretty quickly, but each one is going to hit a dynamic of what it looks like to follow Jesus. Matthew chapter 8, and we're going to start in verse 18. And some of you are not going to get past the cute picture of the fox, I understand. It was a cost that I counted before I put it up there. So if you remember nothing else, that was the sermon with the cute fox. We're good. This is going to be a little section in Matthew as he's writing it, marks it out by saying they're going to go to the other side of the lake, and then this little section of stories ends when they get to the other side of the lake. And so it's 3 quick snapshots that Matthew's writing down to tell us something about following Jesus, and he sets it out in a literary style where he marks it out by his geographic notations. He's saying, Jesus says he saw the crowd around them, and he gave orders to cross to the other side of the lake. He's starting this little teachings. Then a teacher of the law came to him and said, Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go. We often take that as this big esoteric example. I'll follow you wherever you go. Just remember in the story, Jesus just said, hey, I'm going to the other side of the lake. And he's like, hey, I'll follow you wherever you go. It's not a deep esoteric question, though it echoes deep into the deep recesses of our heart, doesn't it, when you start to think about it? But for Jesus, it was pretty straightforward. Jesus replied, foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. This is not a comfortable place to be. Another disciple, this is already a follower of Jesus, a disciple, came to him and said, Lord, first let me go and bury my father. But Jesus told him, follow me and let the dead bury their own dead. And then the story just drops off. You don't know what happened to them. You don't know where they were at. You don't know what they ultimately ended up deciding. But the story is pretty straightforward. Jesus says, hey, there's a crowd around me. Let's go to the other side of the lake, which was going to be going to an area that wasn't as familiar. They're going to leave that. And as they do, a teacher of the law, somebody who knew all the words of God from the Old Testament, who knew who God was, what God had done, he was able to teach the people, this is how it looks for us to follow him. He knew all the contents. He was comfortable in a place of knowledge and leading others in practice. And what Jesus says to him is just to challenge that piece of comfort and security, both physical and financial, in a simple statement saying, these people or these things have places to lay their head. I don't have that. The lingering question, are you willing to follow me even into places of discomfort, both physical, financial, emotional, things that you're not sure about? Everybody's wondering, is it my kid? I love that. All the parents are like, think that one's ours? Somebody will run a report and let you know. It was really funny to watch just across the room. It was a collective like, is that one? You think that's us? They do all sound the same, and then you just get that sense of like, that one's mine. I can tell. We'll see who's right. Anybody want to cast out? We want to cast bets? Anybody want? No? We're good? All right. Sorry. Jesus gives this hard teaching. We don't have time for this today. Jesus gives this really hard word. What I wanted to say at the snapshot, he's coming to them. These are people that are thinking about starting to follow Jesus. And what Jesus says at the beginning of this is, I want you to count the cost. I want you to recognize and realize that following me is not all rainbows and unicorns. He doesn't say that. He says other things in the created order have a place to lay their head. I don't have that, guaranteed. I'll sleep, but I don't know where. Are you okay with that kind of life? And again, we don't know if that person said yes or no. Matthew's not concerned with that. He's raising that question, I think, for the people of God to ask that question for ourselves. Are we willing to follow Jesus even when it leads to places of discomfort and uncertainty? And the next person says, all right, just let me go bury my dad first. And if you've ever heard a sermon on this, you've heard plenty of different options of what that could mean that all look to soften that blow a little bit to make it not quite a harsh statement. I would just say Jesus is raising up like, no, I want to be in this story. What he's highlighting is the priority. I was reading this story as I was doing a Discovery Bible study with one of my friends who wasn't a Christian. And so we just asked the question, what do you think God's saying in this story? Simple, let's read it. What do you think he's saying about it? And his answer was, Jesus doesn't want to be your side chick. And I was like, that is the first time I have ever heard that as an answer to this question. His answer, I was like, tell me more about what you mean, right? I kind of wanted to go off on that route and just have him tell a bunch more. I was like, I'm totally going to use this someday. So tell me more about this. But for him, it was like, Jesus wants to be the center. Jesus, if we're following him, is not something that we add onto our life. That second set of questions, as I was studying it and I was thinking it, the comfort and the security is really important. But as I was contemplating and just thinking through, as somebody who is a disciple and looks to make disciples, I often find this is a statement that I hear. And Jesus is encouraging those who are considering following him to ask it. And even if you've been following Jesus for a little while, I encourage you to ask it because oftentimes there's things that we reserve. As a note to think about this and maybe journal this week, which is one of those practices we talked about, to reflect with this. Jesus, I want to follow you, but first, what do you fill in with that? Is there something? There's a relationship I want to secure. The number of people who have looked me dead in the eyes and said, I want to follow Jesus, but first I need a girlfriend or a boyfriend, and that way of life isn't compatible with finding one of those in this culture, and so I'm going to do that first, and then I'll go all in following Jesus. I hear that countless times. In the last 20 years of leading and multiplying these things we call missio communities, the number of people who have walked away from the faith because they thought they needed to find and secure a relationship first is astounding. For some, it's I need to find a spouse first, a boyfriend, a girlfriend. I need to secure this friend group, and then I will start following Jesus. For others, it's an accomplishment, right? As soon as I hit this next tier in my job, then I'll start following. I know what Jesus has called me into. I know what he's invited me into. I know what it looks like to follow him. But I'm going to do that after I secure this promotion, or after I win this prize, or after I reach this level of athletics, because that's going to demand all my time and my energy and my affection right now. And so when that's done, then I'm all in on following Jesus. And you best believe I will be there. Maybe it's an experience, be it I watch it happen around something as simple as I'm going to secure a house, and that's going to take a lot of work, and this whole Jesus thing takes a lot of time, and so I'm going to go secure a house first. There's a number of people that I watch when it happens to sexual experiences. Like, I'm going to go do this first, and I'm going to get out of my system, and then I'll follow Jesus. And that's not the way that works at all, in case you're wondering. But it's something that we feel as humans. There's a set of experiences I want to have first, and then I'll go all in on Jesus. Then I'll look to him as Messiah and rescue and Savior. And then I'll start following him. Financial security. And then that thing that started off on I just got to secure a job, and then I got to get a better job, then I get a bigger job. It's like, well, when I retire, then I will have time, and then I'll start following Jesus. And what you notice with this flow is that it takes your entire life, and you never quite get around to that thing that you said mattered most. Following Jesus. And so I'd encourage you this week. Are there things that Jesus has invited you into? He said, hey, I'm going here. Do you want to come with me? I will go with you, Jesus, where I know you're leading me, and I know would be life, and I know would be light, and I know would be joy, and I know would be flourishing. But first, I want to lock this thing in. What would that be for you? Is that a temptation at all? We're not going to share out loud on this one. But take maybe 20 seconds and reflect on that. Is there something that the Spirit just brings to mind that we've been wagering? When I get here, then I will do. What I love about Matthew's storytelling is you have no idea how those two humans responded. Many times you've probably often read it that they peeled off and just did what they were going to do. Matthew doesn't say that. In the same way for us, when we hear the invitation of Jesus afresh, will you follow me? We can answer and have two pathways to walk, one that leads to life and light and freedom and healing and hope, and one that does not. And that Jesus is so kind to offer that over and over and over again to us. So hear his voice. Once again, you are invited to follow him. But I also encourage you to use intellectual integrity in thinking through the matters of your own heart. What are the things that I feel like maybe I need to do first, and then I will follow him? And then ask him to minister in those spaces. The next story is going to show us something else about being a follower of Jesus. And so read this one carefully as I read it out loud, because you're about to turn to your friends and say, what do you learn about following Jesus from this passage? See what I did there? You got an advanced notice. You got a warning. I love you. And so we're going to read this story, and then you're going to turn towards each other. What do you learn about following Jesus from this story? Then he, that is Jesus, got in the boat, and his disciples followed him, which is beautiful, right? He said, follow me. They follow him in the boat. And they follow him. Suddenly, a furious storm came onto the lake so that the waves swept over the boat, but Jesus was sleeping. I don't know if this is Matthew's storytelling or Jesus had that superpower to fall asleep immediately when the boat starts moving, because it's real quick. The storm comes in, Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, Lord, save us, we're going to drown. He replied, you have little faith, why are you so afraid? Then he got up. He rebuked the wind and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, what kind of man is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. Last year, if you remember, we went through the book of Jonah. And so this story is actually flipping a lot of those characters in the story. When the storm comes up, they're able to cry out, Lord, save us. And Jesus is the true and greater Jonah, who doesn't have to get thrown overboard, but he actually can just tell it, hey, shut up, and it calms down, which is amazing. But I would love for you guys to turn towards each other. What do you learn about following Jesus from this story? I'm going to give us a few minutes to answer it. If you're like, I don't know, just stare at somebody else in your group, and they'll start talking. Sound good? Awesome. Take a few seconds to look at it, let it go down in your heart, and then I'm going to tell you when to go. So the introverts and the mental processors who need a little bit more time will have a little bit of time to gain up to those verbal processors who always want to talk first. So everybody's going to be quiet for a few seconds, and then we'll talk in just a moment. What do you learn about Jesus in following him from this story? All right, turn towards a few friends. Keep the group small because it's going to be a small amount of time you're talking. Sound good? Ready, set, go. I love the way that this story in particular captures our imaginations and our experience so well in so few verses. I love it because it captures our imagination, because it's one of those stories that you can just put yourself on the boat and you're trying to figure it out, right? As you read it, it's like, oh man, I'm on the boat. I'm shaking Jesus. I'm trying to wake up. And then all of a sudden he wakes up and he goes, like almost like a parent to a child, right? Like, guys, like, why do you have such a little faith? Like, I'm on the boat. It's okay. I called you into this space. I will lead you through this space. But also, you're allowed to wake him up. And this cry of Jesus, save us, we're going to go drown. We're going to drown is so light. It's so human, right? It's such a feeling and emotion that we can identify. If you've been following Jesus for any amount of time, or if you just started following him, that cry is what starts it. Save me. I can't do this, and I'm about to go under. It's incredible. This story is for those maybe that have been following Jesus for a little while. You said yes, you got on the boat, you started that journey with him, and it led into a storm. This experience of following Jesus is not calm waters all the time. You might have gotten on the boat, and it's a moment of elation where you cried out, Jesus, I need you, and you're rescued, you're welcomed in. You feel an overwhelming sense of freedom and love and being forgiven and restoration, and this power of the Spirit fills you, and you come in. Can you remember feeling that when you started following Jesus? This is brand new. This is life. And then the storm hits. As the collective people of God, which is a lot more of what this represents than just a personal storm, because they're all together on the boat in one space, a storm comes in and blows up suddenly, and you're left in a space where you wonder, is Jesus really going to do what he said he would do? Jesus' inaction is causing the disciples to wonder if he's really going to come through like he said he would. Would he really protect? Would he really rescue? Would he really save? Would he really keep them from drowning? I don't think they were looking to be like, Jesus could probably use this later in a sermon. Let's give him something. Hey, Jesus, we're going to drown. And then Jesus wakes up and he says, oh, little faith. Let's preach that someday. These dudes really thought they were at the end of it and they were going to drown. The Israelites were not a seafaring people. They had boats that crossed lakes. Their boats were fishing vessels, most likely, not suited for the wide open sea. And if you've ever been on a boat that feels like it's going under, it hits something deep in your core that causes you to say, I think I'm going to drown, I need help. And you cry out to whoever or whatever you think will rescue you. So the disciples go to the right object and they tell Jesus, Jesus, save us. We think we're going to drown. I would so strongly encourage you to write that question down for yourself. What are the spaces where you want to cry out to Jesus, Jesus, I feel like I'm drowning. Jesus, if you don't come through this relationship, this series of relationships, this financial mess, this dealing that's going on in my heart, my family, you called me into this mission and now I have this missional community and I feel like I'm going to drown. I need you to save me. From a place of desperation. Also encourage you to ask, what are the situations where you've been led because you're following Jesus, but you actually are experiencing right now in this moment with Jesus, fears if he will still provide, still protect, still sustain. This is a question for followers of Jesus. I'm with you. I'm following you. I started this journey. I'm this deep in it right now, though. And you have a fear. Jesus, will you show your power? Jesus, will you guide? Jesus, will you heal? Jesus, will you sustain? Situations that you're in with him. Maybe the storm seems too big, the problem too complex. Sometimes we need to rightly orient ourselves within that we don't make all the storms disappear. But that's why I love Jesus' word right here. He's like, you have so little faith. And again, we punt that to a theological word. It's like, oh yeah, it's that religious thing. It means trust. As you're experiencing the storm, is your actual posture one of trust towards Jesus, that I can trust you in this storm? Or are the fears getting the best of you in this moment? The beautiful invitation of Jesus is you cry out as you're following him, Lord, save us. I feel like I'm going to drown. And Jesus lovingly answers and acts. In this story, I fully get it happens in what feels like a sitcom length. And in our life, it does not always work out like that. But Jesus is still the same Jesus, and he's inviting us still to trust, even if it takes time. The Israelites in Egypt had a much different story. Israelites in the wilderness had a much different story. It took a little longer. But that trust was still invited with just as much hope. One more story. So when he arrives at the other side of the region of the Gerasenes, the two demon-possessed men coming from the tombs met him. Imagine this, how chaotic and swirling and frustrating and confusing what just happened on the sea is now happening in humanity. What was happening in the natural world in a storm is now being presented in the physical flesh of humans. Two people, demon-possessed, so possessed by darkness, were so violent that no one else could pass that way. And that just happens to be where Jesus cruises up on his ship, right? Out of all the beaches to dock on that stretch of land, he pulls right up to the graveyard with the two demon-possessed man. Mark would tell us they run out naked towards him. This is the same story that takes place in Mark. He just tells it a lot longer. So I'm glad we're in Matthew because we're going. They were so violent, no one else could pass that way. What do you want with us, Son of God? They shouted. Beautiful answer, right? The disciples just said, what sort of man is this that even the wind and waves obey him? The demons come out and say, all right, we know who that is. That's the Messiah. That's the Son of Man, and he has power over us. So what the disciples were even wondering, the demons already knew. Have you come to torture us before the appointed time? Some distance from them, a large herd of pigs was feeding. The demons begged Jesus, if you drive us out, and it seems like you might, Send us into the herd of pigs. So Jesus said to them, go. So they came out and went to the pigs, and the whole herd rushed down the steep bank of the lake and died in the water. Those tending the pigs ran off and went into the town and reported all this, including what had happened to the two demon-possessed man. They tell him, hey, commerce is ruined. Our whole herd is now gone, but these two humans have been set free. Those crazy people that live in the tombs who are disavowed, they're disconnected, they're on their own, they're so violent none of us can approach them. They're restored and they're now being human, but our pigs are gone. And the whole town went out to meet Jesus. And they celebrated and rejoiced that human beings have been restored and they lived happily ever after. When restoration and salvation starts to mess with commerce, sometimes the enemy and evil still wants to make a mess of it, right? They saw him and they pleaded with him to leave their region. So the very next verse, if you were to read, is that Jesus left and he went to his hometown. In this snapshot, we see Jesus is absolutely, authoritatively in control of even the darkest, most disabling powers, dehumanizing realities in the world. Jesus can still restore. And we also see in the presence of seeing that takes place, human beings on their own can reject that. So again, as we follow Jesus, how do we respond to the restorative power of Jesus? A question for us as a community, though, I would love, even if you jotted it down and wrote it down later. Are we living as if this is the Jesus we follow? The one who can tell wind and waves, chill out, and it goes silent. The one who's present with us. The one who is powerful, not just over the elements, but the powers that stand behind the elements. Is that a reality that you live in as an individual disciple, as a community of disciples who are together in an MC? That when you pray and think about the problems that your MC is involved in, the neighborhoods you're a part of, the areas of injustice that you've been called into to be an agent of light, do you come in thinking there's not much that's going to take place here and it's probably not going to go well, but we're just going to do it? Or do you come in as one who has been given the authority that Jesus has set into that space to be present? The power is still there. Jesus is still faithful. Is that what undergirds our life in Christ following him? Is a sense that that powerful God is King of all, and I'm stepping into this place as his ambassador. He can make a choice if he's going to heal it in this moment, or it's going to take time, or I might not see it one day, but I can stand here in power with the presence of Jesus because that's who I follow and that's who goes with me. That is a bold invitation, and it is an incredible reality of who we are as we follow Jesus together. 3 different snapshots tell a story of the kind of community who gets to follow Jesus with those first disciples. Don't miss this, fam. We get to take up our role in that story as we together follow Jesus as a group of disciples in 2024. Would this be more of the reality of who we are as we follow Jesus together? Would you guys pray with me? Jesus, thank you for these stories that you had Matthew write down of you and your life together with your disciples. I pray as we move towards the table, our thoughts and our hearts and our imaginations are able to be captured by the reality that you are Lord and you reign above all. God, would our thoughts and our hearts and our imaginations be captured that you've called us with you even into the storms and you are present there as well. And so where we are faithless or faith leaking, would you renew and restore? And God, would we even be filled with a fresh sense of your power over the powers that exist in this world that seem so dominant? Would we remember that in your death and your resurrection, you showed that you are truly Lord of all? I want to leave us with one more signpost pointing us towards the future as we come to the table. Yes, following Jesus is based in past events. Yes, it has present realities and present things that we get to experience, but this path of following Jesus does lead somewhere. There is a final act in the story when everything is being restored, and Jesus himself is on earth again as God. And we that have bowed our knee to King Jesus are his people, and we get to enjoy a restored creation. This path of following Jesus does not always stay in the storms. There is one day when he tells it all, that's enough. Calm down, does away with the evil, does away with the oppression, does away with the abuse, does away with the powers that have been causing this forever and ever. And there's a moment when we join with all of those who have bowed a knee to King Jesus and struggled in their own time and leaned with trust and received the grace of Jesus, and we will shout out together these words. John writes, "You are worthy to open the scroll and to open its seals, because you were slain, and with the blood you purchased for God persons from every tribe and language and people and nation. You have made us to be a kingdom of priests to serve our God, and they will reign over the earth. Worthy is the Lamb who was slain to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise. To him who sits on the throne and to the Lamb be praise and honor and glory and power forever and ever." Again, people singing, "Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. Amen. Praise and glory and wisdom and honor and thanks and power and strength be to our God forever and ever. Amen." If you find your heart is just struggling with that faith piece, I've heard these stories, I believe. Pray the second half of that prayer. Lord, help my unbelief in the parts I don't get. And maybe even as we take these elements, the bread and the juice, you will find your courage renewed. Even as a meal does your physical body, the reality of what it represents will fill your soul. Nick, can you hold the juice for me? And I'll have the bread. And if you're a follower of Jesus, I invite you, Missio, come to the table, take the elements, return to your seat. We'll take it together as a family. You're welcome to the table.